I'm Marcus Eichhorn. I'm a lecturer in ecology at the University of Nottingham, and we've come here today to Curtain Wood to understand the structure of a Nottinghamshire woodland. This is a fantastic example of an ash elm woodland. It's an ancient woodland and it's about 70 years old, regenerating. It's got quite an exciting structure, lots going on in it, and I've been studying it for the past year. I was looking for a wood that hadn't been intervened with for a long time. So this wood was probably clear-felled in the 1930s and used for agriculture, and since then basically it's just been growing back up perfectly naturally. There hasn't been any management in here, any human intervention. It's just what would normally happen if this was left on its own to its own devices. So it's exciting to see how things have been changing and adapting. The big trees, if we look up, the canopy is being formed by ash trees, and they're only just starting to come into leaf. You can see some of them are flowering at the beginning of May. Underneath the ash trees there's a layer of elm trees. Now there used to be much larger elm trees. Of course we had Dutch elm disease here back in the 1960s and 1970s. That took out a lot of the larger elm trees, but they're starting to come back and to recover now, and so we're getting, in this woodland actually, we have some of the largest elm trees in the area. This here will be one of the last of the big old birch trees. Now when this area was cleared for agriculture, most of the trees would have been taken down, and then the very first trees to get onto an open field and colonise it are usually birch trees. They're essentially the weeds of the tree world. They grow extremely quickly, they get to maturity quite fast. But the trouble with birches is they're not very tolerant of shade, and so this will have raced up to being a big tree, and that's about as big as a birch tree ever gets. But it's starting to get a bit old, it's starting to fall down. This one's clinging on, but soon it'll be taken out by some other larger trees. And all around us you can see the wreckage of older trees that have been falling down and losing out in the competition for space in the forest. Well, what we have here are a series of wooden posts which you can see sticking out with the red paint on top. And they're at 10-metre intervals in a grid through the forest. And then within each 10 by 10 metre plot we map the positions of the individual trees. Well, this is the main tool I use, which is a standard tape measure. The great thing about forest ecology is you can do fantastic research with very few tools. My old supervisor used to tell me that if you can't do it with 4 sticks and a piece of string, it's probably not worth doing, which is actually a very useful rule to play by in the forest, because if you take high-tech equipment or anything electronic with you, then as soon as you drop it in the stream, then it's broken or the battery runs out. And if you're off in the middle of nowhere, then that's something you can't rely upon. This is particularly primitive. So just for marking out lines in the forest, you have a stick and you tie it to a post and then you run it out so you know where the line is. No, just loop it round, just run it over. This is just handy so you can tell which trees are inside your plot and which trees are outside. So it helps you to see, because it's quite difficult in the forest to see the trees for the wood, as it were. Bit of string, and then you know quite clearly which part of the forest you're focusing on. Oh, everyone has, some of my best friends are trees. Probably shouldn't put that in, but trees are people too. I do have some favourite trees. I'll take you to one of my favourite trees in a bit.
Okay.
Well, this is one of my favourite trees. This is a massive ash tree, and you can see from the shape of it that it's had quite a troubled history. So at some point in the past of this tree, it probably got struck heavily by something falling on top of it that caused the trunk to bend, and it's now recovered and started to grow back up again. But because of whatever happened to it in the past, it's retained this curved shape which it'll have for the rest of its life. I have actually brought you to my favourite tree. Now, you can't miss this if you're going to come. So, stay there if you want. This is going to take probably more of a leap than you're comfortable with. So this ancient ash tree here is about the biggest tree in the forest. But ashes, like any other organism, they grow old eventually, they start to decay and start to die. And this ash, as you can see, is reaching the very end of its lifespan. So there's still a few leaves and still a few flowers on the very tips of the branches in some places, Some of it has already rotted and fallen down, so you can see it's beginning to collapse. And this one probably won't be with us for very much longer. But this is a mighty old tree at the very end of its life. But the great thing about a tree when it reaches this kind of level is it creates so many habitats for everything else. So I don't know if you can see from down there, but what we have here is a large hole at the base of the tree that you could probably fit a small child into that quite easily. And that looks like it's been used as a hole for foxes in the past. Up at the top of the tree you've got snags, upward pointing breaks, you've got old dead branches and hollows, you've got dead wood. So it's a fantastic habitat for nesting birds and for insects and for birds to find food on. So this kind of tree supports a huge number of other species in the forest.